This story begins with an ending. On April 15th, 1993, the Minnesota franchise, once called the North Stars, played their final game and were relocated to Dallas for the following season.
Excited to present to Dallas the national anthem.
The dreams and aspirations of Minnesota faithfuls were taken away that day. But they never stopped hoping for them to return. Around 4 years later, they would get their wish.
Not about St. Paul, though in many ways it is. For St. Paul, what an incredible transforming opportunity to bring the NHL home and to have it housed in St. Paul.
The NHL decided to expand once more. The Minnesota Wild came to the great state of hockey. They started out strong, hiring a Stanley Cup winning coach and drafting a sniper out of the Czech Republic.
Marian Gaborik from Trenčín, Slovakia.
And in only their third season, they clinched a playoff spot, even besting Patrick Waugh's Colorado Avalanche in overtime of Game 7. And then going on and beating the Canucks in yet another Game 7. But their postseason magic would run out, being swept by the Anaheim Ducks in the Western Conference Finals. They would never make it back to that stage of the playoffs again. Over the next 16 seasons, excluding the 2004-2005 lockout year, the Wild won only 2 playoff bouts. Questionable drafting to trades to free agent acquisitions, Minnesota never became a legit contender. Now it's the 2019-2020 season. The Wild are in some sort of purgatory. 2 albatross contracts in Zach Parise and Ryan Sutter, weighing them down. The GM not committing to a rebuild or contention. It's up to GM thumbs to fix the great state of hockey. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my new NHL 20 franchise mode here in the state of hockey. Yes, we are here in Minnesota. I've kind of spoiled that throughout the ending of my last franchise mode. Goodbye, Columbus. We are taking on the other 2000 expansion team in the Minnesota Wild. I'm so excited. It's only been a day since my last series ended, but I'm so hyped to start something new. I'm not saying that the old franchise mode was getting stale, but it's nice to jump back into reality a bit. I was so far out. I was so far removed from reality. 25 years later, nothing felt real anymore. But being placed back into reality, we are taking over the Minnesota Wild. I'm so excited, and if you're excited, leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe. We're on our way to 200 subscribers. This is 154 days posting in a row. You can't stop, Mr. 24/7. This is episode 0, so there won't be any simulating. We're just going to discuss the roster similar to what I did in my last franchise mode. But I am so excited, and you might be wondering, Owen, why are you so excited? We're in the Western Conference, baby. I was stuck in the East playing Metro teams for 25 years. That's fine, but coming over here, the West, we have new opportunities. We have a new team. We have new stars. We have new guys to give nicknames to. I'm so excited to be here in the great state of hockey, Minnesota. And Why is Minnesota the state of hockey? Question. Why? Why? What has Minnesota done in the last, I don't know, 20 years? I mean, it's 2020. They've been around since 2000. I'm not trying to bash you, Minnesota, but I want to bring you to the next level. Similar to what I did with Columbus, I want to bring you to the next level. Another 3-year plan is what I'm going to go for. And we're going to talk about a lot of things. And how about we just jump right into the rosters? I'm so excited. And it's going to be nice. I've spent so much time editing this roster. I spent hours. I've spent sleepless nights. I've been up till 4:30 in the morning every day for the last 2 weeks making sure the roster was finalized. And I'm pretty sure I'm there. But I'm doing this video just so I can look back at the rosters, making sure everything is right. I've done test simulations. Everything seems to be okay. And even before we get into the rosters, I want to say thank you for your guys' support. I did put out a video, I don't know, about a week ago. Don't copyright me, YouTube. I put out a video about this franchise mode, the newest one, and there was a section in that video telling you about creating a player. And I'm happy to say everybody that commented, I didn't take into account sarcastic comments like, ooh, there's a funny name. No, serious comments. I created your player. There's about 15 new created players in the draft, including all my custom guys that I just decided to chuck into the drafts. These next 4 draft classes are absolutely stacked. And by stacked, it's going to get a little ridiculous. And I thought I would just put a little bit of salt. I almost said salt and pepper. Salt and pepper. Yeah, salt and pepper. I'm white. Everything is spicy to me. It's going to be fun. But how about we take an in-depth dive at the Minnesota Wild? And I'm not a big fan of the Minnesota Wild. I know about them. I remember becoming a hockey fan. I remember they would always get to the second round, lose against Chicago in the first or second round. That's kind of the purgatory state I was talking about. They were a really good team. I remember when they got Devin Dubnyk. They were just on fire. This guy came out of nowhere. He was with plenty of teams. He was with Phoenix. He was with Edmonton. He was with Montreal at one point. He came out of nowhere. He helped them get to the postseason for a few years in a row. They were never a contender. They were a few seasons you could have been like, yeah, they had one division title. They thought they were going to go a bit farther. And they never managed to get back to the conference finals. They've never been to the Stanley Cup finals. They've never been to the dance. Okay? They obviously have history with the Minnesota North Stars, but it's kind of like the Atlanta Thrashers and the Winnipeg Jets and the original Winnipeg Jets. It's not the same team. They're two different franchises. We're making history with this one. All the firsts we make with this team will be actual firsts, because the North Stars went to the dance a few times, 3 times. Pittsburgh, Islanders, and no, yes. Wait, I'm right. 2 times maybe. Yeah, I'm right. But I wouldn't call myself a fan of the Minnesota Wild. I know about Minnesota. I'm pretty good with all prospect pools in the NHL, and I think I've done Minnesota fairly well. I think if you disagree with some of their overalls, I get it. I understand that. It's okay. Because it's a franchise mode. It's meant to be interpreted. It's gonna be biased at some parts, but we're all here together. Yes, together. So, let's jump in. There are a few things I'm going to discuss, but let's start at center. We're going to go through the depth chart. We're going to look at all the prospects, okay? And the Minnesota Wild made a trade recently, okay? And this is the first thing that we're going to talk about that's important to the franchise mode itself. The Pittsburgh Penguins traded Addison, a defenseman prospect, Alex Galchenyuk, and a first-round draft pick in 2020 for Jason Zucker. And Jason Zucker, you can find, is still here on the roster. But then you're like, Owen, why is Alex Galchenyuk and Addison still on the roster? Now, I'm taking over Minnesota. The first thing I'm going to do when we get into simulating is trade Jason Zucker to Pittsburgh for that first-round draft pick. I think it's going to be pretty easy to swing. I think Zucker for that first. Pittsburgh's a pretty good team. The first-round pick isn't going to be a lot of value, and just to make more things realistic, it'll work out. I thought, if we just roster move him over to Pittsburgh, it's going to be harder for us to get that pick, and I want to keep things more realistic because we do have Galchenyuk and Addison on the roster. So Zucker over to Pittsburgh, it's done. Zucker isn't technically here. We have Pittsburgh's first already, if you think about it, okay? So that's the first thing off the table. I'm glad we got a chance to talk about that. Jason Zucker, I hope you do well in Pittsburgh, man. I mean, you whooped Montreal the other night, which makes me very sad, but you'll play pretty well in Pittsburgh. Okay, so let's start at center. And there are a few things. There are a few questionable players that you're like, maybe why that kind of overall? Why that statistics? Okay. Let's start at the top. Eric Stahl. He's on a fantastic deal. He's 34. And all these players depend on what kind of season or what kind of road we're trying to take. Is Minnesota a contender right now? That's a question that we're going to ask ourselves for the next 20 minutes, okay? And you might already have your own ideas. You want, Owen, go for a rebuild right now. Owen, this is a team that can go right now if you just trade a bit of pieces. You can go for it, and I can agree with both sides, but I want to take an in-depth look and see what kind of team we could be, because we could be good at simulating. If we're going to be bad, I want to be the worst. So we can get a high pick, draft potentially Alexis Lafreniere that you can put anywhere in your lineup except defense, because why would you do that? That's a franchise player. Are we looking for a 3-year plan similar to my last franchise mode, which worked out perfectly, 9 Stanley Cups, if you're not familiar? Eric Stahl's a damn good NHL player. A $3.25 million contract for the next 2 years is a great deal. If we want to trade him at the deadline, if we want to trade him right now, that is a perfect deal, an easy deal to swing. A lot of teams have that kind of cap space, and a lot of teams are looking for a second, potentially a first-line center to fill out, because there's a lot of contenders, maybe Arizona, maybe you look to Toronto, or maybe even Pittsburgh, that are looking to go for it one last time, or in Arizona's case, for the first time. But Eric Stahl is definitely a serviceable NHL player. It says he's a second-line forward. I completely agree with that. He's almost at the end of his career, so we have to think about that. If we're going to go for it right now, you don't trade these players. Mikko Koivu, brother of Saku Koivu, Montreal legend. His contract is up at the end of the year, but let's see how much he would ask for. $4 million. A little less than what he's asking, almost $1 million less than what he's asking for right now. That's a player that we can also trade. If we're looking to tank, these are easy contracts to move out of the way for firsts, for seconds, for prospects around the league. Okay, that's why this is going to be such an interesting team to use. And speaking of interesting, Alex Galchenyuk, man, let's talk about you for a few seconds. 25 years of age, 81 overall. How many career points do you have? 296. You're a minus 53 in your career in almost 500 games. I was listening to this interview. I can't remember who it was, but there's only about 8 weeks left of the NHL season IRL when you're watching this. I don't know when you're watching this, but when this video was uploaded, there's about 8 weeks left. Alex Galchenyuk, up to that point, has not been a fantastic player in the slightest. I think the low elite potential is justified. I know there's plenty of top 5 picks that are busts in NHL history that just blew up early into their careers. It happens, but I think a low elite can go either which way. He can be a bust, he can be terrible, he can turn into an awful player right away, or he can be a serviceable NHL player. Right? It depends. It depends on how his seasons go. How his season goes, especially if guys like Stahl and Koivu go. He's going to have to be in a bigger role. I was trying to think of a fancy word, but my dialect is not the best, and it is very late at night. Okay, Alex Galchenyuk, not that contract. 4.9 for him right now is not the best, but a contract that we could also trade. And I think the coolest player, the most interesting player on the Minnesota Wild's roster at this very moment, excluding Kirill Kaprizov, we'll get to him, he's an absolute stud. Gerald Mayhew. He's putting up... Go check his stats out right now in the AHL. I know it's the AHL. You can say whatever you want. But it is one of the highest competitive leagues in the world. It's a step down from the NHL. It's somewhere in between the NHL and the KHL. Or around there. You got the next level of players to the NHL. He's putting up almost a goal per game in the AHL. You don't see that in any league. You maybe see that in the OHL, the Q, the WHL. But in the AHL, where it's not the highest scoring league in the world, you don't just put up a goal per game in any league without being sort of skilled. So you see right there his shooting stats, I think, are justified. Slap shot, they're all at 90s. Putting up goals, but I think he's got one more year of development. He's at a high top 9. I think he hasn't proved himself as an NHL player, but I think he's a goal scorer. That's what he's going to do. He scored 27 goals last year in the AHL. He's a 60-point guy. I think if he can transition to the NHL, he's going to be a good third liner scoring goals for us, especially if we decide to rebuild. He could be a good trade asset if he decides to grow. And I don't know why it says he's a two-way forward, because he's not. I can change that easily. But his other stats are kind of fringe. Puck skills aren't the best. Defense isn't the best. Skating is okay. Physical is whatever. Offensive awareness is pretty good. So he's in the middle of the road. He is a goal scorer, though. That is what he is, an absolute goal-scoring freak. You don't just put up a goal per game in the AHL without being kind of talented. And getting to one of our first prospects, 21 years of age. I don't know if he's having NHL action. I think he is. Yeah, I think he's playing in the NHL currently. Not the best rookie season, but I think he's going to be a solid NHL player. He's 78 overall. He's a two-way forward, and he's 21 years of age. Kind of reminds me of Big Texas, Alexander Texier in my Blue Jackets franchise mode. He's a two-way forward. He's young, very, very young. I think he'd be a solid, maybe second, third line centerman in the future. Especially, he's going to get a roster spot this year. Maybe send him in the AHL. I'm not totally sure just yet. Let's go to in the system. Minnesota, I will give them credit. They have a bunch of prospects. They don't have any top. They have one top tier prospect that's like going to be a superstar for sure. There's a few middling guys, but there are some solid options in the AHL, in the CHL that will be serviceable NHL guys. And an NHL guy right here is Ryan Donato. What trade was that? That was a Boston trade. Who did they... Charlie Coyle. 23 years of age, two-way forward. So Minnesota's not an offensive team. They're more of a defensive style playing system. I get that, especially if you're not the most talented up front. You want to make sure you can stop the puck from going in your own net. Victor Rask, who is always offered to me in franchise modes, and I'm like, this guy is not an NHL player, really. He can play in the NHL if we need a scapegoat throughout the season. Joel Eriksson Ek. I famously remember this guy as the man who survived 2 straight Shea Weber slap shots and lived to tell the tale. I think he got injured because of that. It was a few months ago. He hasn't dominated the NHL just yet. I'm not sure what kind of stats he's putting up this year. I should have checked that before the episode, but I can usually tell how players are doing. Joel Eriksson Ek, I'm not totally sold on him just yet. I remember him when he was younger, maybe 19 years of age. He was in this franchise mode or in NHL games. He was a good player to go after and trade for and put on your team. 22 years of age. Top 6 potential, 77 overall. He is that fringe guy. He has to prove it right now if he's an NHL player, if he can go with us. He's a sniper, apparently. He's got okay shooting stats, not the best. He's definitely got to improve. 22, he's a prospect still, but he's not an elite prospect. If he was 2 years younger, yeah, for sure, but he's getting to that age, and I'm not totally comfortable with having a player like that, especially with trade value, sitting on my roster, not developing at all. I want to keep our assets going. And then you got a few middling guys here, Strum, a few guys, but it gets interesting around Alexander Kovanov. Now, hockey Twitter is my favorite thing, and it usually brings up a lot of hockey gems. He's playing in the QMJHL. That's what it's called, the QMJHL? I'm pretty sure I'm right. He's playing with the Moncton Wildcats, if I'm not mistaken. He is a machine. If I'm not mistaken, he's putting up like 79 points in like 30-something games this year, which is just incredible. I was debating giving him the high top 6, but it is the Q. Point totals are usually up in that league, but I gave him a higher overall. He's at a pretty good potential. He's at 19 years of age. He's 1 year removed from his draft class. He's going to be a serviceable NHL guy. We could always transition him to the left or right wing. He's a playmaker. He's going to be a good player for us, I believe. You got a bunch of top 9 players on this team. You got Guskov, you got Giroux, then you got Duar, who's a high top 9, which is definitely an interesting guy. Connor Duar. I do like this guy. Now, if you do have any suggestions in the next day, obviously I'm going to have to record pretty soon my next episode. But if you do have any suggestions, always drop a comment. I would love to start a discussion. Then you got Adam Beckman, who kind of slides under the radar for most prospect pools. You don't see this kid up there very often, but he was just drafted in 2019 as a 3rd-round pick, and he's having a fantastic season with the Spokane Chiefs. He's not signed to a contract, which is fair because he's in the CHL. We have his rights. There's no problem with that. He's going to be a good player too. He's 18, plenty of time to grow. Then you got Bitten, Sokolov, Shaw, and that's it for the centers. They have some awesome prospects, but I think they need 1 or 2 more definitive prospects on this roster. As many as I can get, of course. Now let's transition to the right wing. In the NHL, you have a freshly signed Matt Zuccarello. Obviously, everybody remembers Henrik Lundqvist crying about Zuccarello leaving New York, and that was emotional. I don't know why Matt Zuccarello decided to sign with Minnesota. Out of all the teams he could have signed with, he was having a pretty good season. And then you decided to go to Minnesota. He is injury prone, but when he's healthy, he's a damn good player. He's a really good player. And that's where I'm really weird about this team. IRL. They got plenty of prospects. They just need to rebuild. But then their GM's going out there trading Jason Zucker and then going out there and signing Zuccarello to a $6 million until 2025. That is a contract that's gonna have to go. And that is not a fun deal. He's a good player. He's a serviceable guy. If we retain on that, if we just trade it straight up potentially, we can get a little bit for him, obviously. But Minnesota, what the hell are you doing? That's why I'm here, to fix you guys. You got Ryan Hartman, who's a solid NHLer, nothing too special. A weird deal, 1.9. Is he worth it? I'm not sure. He's going to be good if we're rebuilding. Just have him on a roster. Okay, then you go in the system. And I would say our weakest part about our team, our pool for right wingers. We don't have anybody at superstar caliber, or not even superstar caliber, but we don't have like Beckman or Kovanov sort of players. We don't have any top 6 players there except for Matt Zuccarello that we can turn into assets. But Ludnia, top 9 players rarely turn into NHL caliber guys. So right wing is kind of iffy there. Now let's transition to left wing. Kevin Fiala. What trade was that? That was with Minnesota and the Nashville Predators. Did they trade? Well, whatever. The player that went to Nashville, there's no debate. Nashville was going for it. They didn't go for it hard enough because they didn't win. They lost to Nashville they lost to Dallas in the first round. Kevin Fiala, on the other hand, is going to be a great NHL player. I think right now he has the skills. I just don't think his line mates are particularly the best fit. I was debating giving him the high top 6. I was thinking about it, but then I'm like, I'm not sure. He has bursts of being a fantastic NHL player. I remember when Nashville went on their postseason run and lost to Pittsburgh in the finals. I remember him being fantastic and then breaking something. He's good. He's a good player. I think he's going to shine here on a top role on Minnesota. Then you got Zach Parise. Now, here is the other point I was going to talk about. Remember the 2 albatross contracts we talked about? Now, somebody in my comments... Oh, I forget your name. No, I remember. Don't hate me for the pronunciation. I know you commented about your pronunciation of your name. Alex. Petrionangelov. I'm sorry. If Owen's smart, he'll put it on the screen, but if he's not smart, it's because it's 4 o'clock in the morning and he can't use his brain. He commented somewhere along the lines of the 2 untradeable contracts. Remember, if you're too young, a while back, Minnesota went out and acquired Zach Parise, signed him to like a 12-year deal or something nuts like that up until 2026. That's $7.5 million. And then you have Ryan Sutter at, I think, the exact same deal for the exact amount of term. And I believe they have full no-trade clause. And I would love for NHL in the future to add this feature where players can ask for no-trade clauses or something along that lines. It would make the game more interactive, more interesting, not just flat out, here's players, sign them, trade them. Especially with guys who go out there and ask for $7 million end term, they're not going to just not want a no-trade deal, right? Or no-trade clause. So here is my proposition. This is what's going to happen. Zach Parise and Ryan Sutter are stuck on this roster. It doesn't matter how bad they get. If they're not serviceable NHL guys, we can stick them in the AHL, obviously. But we're not trading them. They are stuck here in Minnesota until they retire 35 Parise. I'm not sure how Sutter is, but they're stuck here in Minnesota. It sucks for me, but I'm just going to have to work around it. Too bad. Too bad. And we're cap-strapped as it is, but obviously there's a lot of contracts to move around as it is. But Zach Parise and Ryan Sutter are stuck here. Now, if you didn't watch this video, and, I mean, I don't know why I'm talking to somebody who hasn't seen the video, I'm just putting that out there. If you comment a few episodes down the road, you could totally trade Zach Parise and Ryan Sutter. They have trade value. You could trade them. I'm not. I think just to keep it a little more interesting, a little more salt and pepper on the series, Zach Parise and Sutter are stuck here. Now, we did talk about Zucker. He's already gone because he was already traded to Pittsburgh, and we're going to make sure we get that first. Let's skip Kaprizov. Let's talk about Foligno. Not a great contract. Minnesota, who's handing out those contracts? There's a few weird contracts on this team that I'm just like, dude, what are you doing? And who was the GM for Minnesota before the new guy? He was bad. He was bad at his job, making weird friggin' decisions. Then you have Jordan Greenway, who is in the same boat as Joel Eriksson Ek. 22 years of age, both similar overall, both exactly the same potential. They are fringe NHL players, and especially if we move guys out of Minnesota, they're going to have to take that next step and be serviceable NHL guys, because if not, their trade value is at their highest, and I will not hesitate to trade them away. Now let's get to the best prospect in Minnesota, Kirill Kaprizov. If you do not know who Kaprizov is, I want you to go onto YouTube after this video. I still need the watch time. Go onto YouTube. Type up Kirill Kaprizov KHL highlights. This kid is an absolute gem. I believe he was a 2015 draftee alongside Connor McDavid in the draft. I mean, not alongside because Eichel was second over. You know what I mean. He was a 2015 draft pick, if I'm not mistaken. This guy is going to be an NHL superstar, and that's why he has that high elite. I didn't make him an 82 or an 83 or an 84, just because I'm going more realistically. He hasn't played a single NHL game. He's dominating the KHL, so he's got that 79. He's got that high elite. He is one of the most highly touted prospects in the world. If you don't think that, I want you to rethink why you're a hockey fan. This kid is going places. He's in a men's league. He's in the KHL. He's 22 years of age. I think he's leading the scoring in the KHL right now, if I'm not mistaken. This guy is the cornerstone of the Minnesota Wild right now, as it is. He is their top prospect, and there's no doubt about that. He is the man. He is the bar. And I'm glad we have him. I've never used him in a franchise mode, so I'm glad we have him here in Columbus. And the rumors are he's going to be coming... Oh, did I just say Columbus? Oh my god, I just said Columbus. Sorry, I'm still trying to get out of my Columbus fever. Minnesota. I'm so glad to use him here in Minnesota. And if I do say Columbus, I'm sorry, don't hate me. I'm trying to get used to Minnesota. This kid is going to be special. Now, let's go into the system. And the only notable guy here, you got Beck, Limbas, but they're AHL guys barely. You have Matthew Boldy. And one of the most controversial things of the draft, personally, I think the third best player in the draft this year was Cole Caulfield. He's leading North American skaters in goal scoring. Matthew Boldy hasn't had the best NCAA year. I believe he's in the NCAA. He's not having the best year. I believe he's put up 2 straight 3-point games, so I think he's got the potential easily, but I don't think he's the highest. He's not the highest overall. I don't think he's the best player they could have gone with. I shook my head at Minnesota. I'm like, you needed goal scoring. You could have got Cole Caulfield. So many other teams could have got Cole Caulfield. That is a Montreal Canadiens fan. I'm so glad we have Cole Caulfield. Hell yeah. But I think Matthew Boldy's going to be a serviceable NHL guy. He's going to need 2, 3 years in the AHL. We're going to play him in the AHL this year, obviously, but he's going to need a bit of time to adjust to the North American game to become a serviceable NHL guy. But he's going to be good when he gets there. Now, let's transition over to the defense. Now, this is where it gets interesting. I think Minnesota's strongest position is defense. You have an aging Ryan Sutter who puts up the most amount of ice time in the season like every year. But he's the albatross contract alongside Zach Parise. That's not a contract I like in the slightest. We have him on a roster. He's 34. He's going to retire before the end of that contract, obviously. He's a serviceable NHL guy right now, which just hurts me because I could totally trade him away for assets, but I cannot. That is the point of this series. I cannot trade him away until he's out of this. He's out of this place. But he's a good NHL defenseman as it is, but he could drop off like that and could just hamper this entire roster. Then you got their best, I think their youngest and brightest defenseman. He's not having the best year, but Minnesota altogether is not having the best year. 25 years of age, 85 overall, medium elite, Matthew Dumba. And I think he was an all-star this year no, he got hurt. Who was Minnesota's all-star? It might have been Matt Dumba. I'm not sure. Last year, he had 50 points in 82 games. What? No. He had 22 points in 32 games last year. He was on pace for a fantastic season. He got hurt, which just sucks. This year, he's not having the best season. He might hit 40 points, if I'm not mistaken. But he's a good NHL defenseman. He's an offensive defenseman. He's signed up to a decent contract, especially for what kind of defenseman he is. He's an offensive powerhouse when he's going to be that guy. The next guy is Jared Spurgeon. And one of the weirdest things I saw this summer, okay? Hey, I know defenseman is not about points, but you just paid... I think this is the highest contract Minnesota has ever given out. $7.575 until 2027. Oh my God, Minnesota. Oh my God. He's 29, man. I don't care what Twitter says. That's not a good contract, guys. He's 29, but at the end of that contract, he's not going to be an NHL defenseman anymore. And he might be. Who knows? But in this game, that contract is not worth it to the kind of player that he is. He could be a higher overall. Yeah, you can argue that. But I don't think he is. I think he's a serviceable NHL defenseman. But at that contract, he could totally hamper us. And we have so many of those contracts that do hamper us. A guy that is expendable, Jonas Brodin, you can trade him. You can trade him for prospects or pick or something along those lines. You can always throw him out there into deals, try him out, see what you can get, because you could totally get something for him. But he is also a serviceable NHL defenseman. Then you got Hunt, who is just kind of there. If you need to swing him, you can, but I guess if you're going through a rebuild, why would you do that? Greg Pattern had a terrible contract. I'm going to have to trade that. That's just, Pattern's not a great defenseman. Sealer. Then you got newly minted Minnesota Wild, Kalen Addison, who I think is going to be a great NHL player one day. He needs a little bit more seasoning, but I think he's going to grow into a fine player for the Wild. In the system, they don't have a lot, okay? Barkowski, Sois, Belpido, who, not really all that interesting. 23 is not really a prospect anymore. Menel, Fedor Gordeev, who has the best name, one of the best names in the NHL, Fedor Gordeev. I love that. Fedor Gordeev forever. If you don't know that reference, Steve Dangle, check him out. You have Simon Johansson, 20 years of age, right-handed. He could be a serviceable NHL defenseman one day, depends on how he grows. And I think one of the worst picks in the 2018 draft, Philip Johansson. Obviously, defensemen aren't always about those points, but he hasn't had a great time in Europe. He's not having a great time, and I think the top 4 low potential is justified. I don't think he's going to be anything super special. I could totally eat my words in a few years, and he could be a great player. But I think as it stands, he's nothing super special. So, let's move over to goaltending. Now, main roster, obviously you have an aging Devin Dubnyk this year. And for the past 3 years, he hasn't been the best defenseman. Obviously, Minnesota has not been the best team. That kind of hampers your ability to play well. Obviously, goalies, it kind of tends on how well your team is doing. Sometimes you just force your team into a better position. I mean, last year wasn't that bad for him. 918 save percentage is pretty good on a team like that. Then you have a 923, which was his last best season. He comes over to Minnesota right here and was great. So the seasons that he's been here, he's been pretty good, except for last year. This year, he's not doing the best. And I think an 84 overall is justified. I think he is a serviceable NHL goalie. I think he makes those crazy saves that you see on Twitter at 3 a.m. that he's like, he did what? He's that guy. He kind of reminds me of Jonathan Quick. I don't think he's declining as quickly, but I think it's based on how well Minnesota is doing. His backup, Alex Stalock, I don't think he's anything special. I think he's a serviceable backup goalie. But if we do trade Devin Dubnyk, who's on a solid contract, an okay contract, nothing too special, he'll have to be the fall guy. And in the system, they have a few guys to talk about. Most notably, Kaapo Kähkönen. He is, if you're not, Minnesota has a fantastic prospect pool. Kaprizov obviously leads the way, but a guy who has fantastic AHL stats, it's not always going to progress into the NHL, but 23 years of age, it's time to prove it. He might jump up in the NHL pretty soon, depending on what happens with us. But I think he could be a serviceable NHL guy one day. Then the next notable guy is Hunter Jones, recently drafted last year, second round, 59th overall, from the Peterborough Petes, 66 overall, medium starting goaltender. This guy is our future goalie currently. If you just let him play a few years in the OHL, do his thing, he could be in the AHL 75 overall in 2 years. Maybe less. He's going to be an NHL guy if we don't find anything super special before then. So that is Minnesota. Now, I said I was going to think of what I think this team is going to be. I think the EA simulation is stupid, and I think it doesn't matter what kind of team you have in the first year. Because this game is weird. You could be a terrible team like Detroit, and you could still play pretty well depending on your line chemistry, right? But personally, I think this team is full of albatross contracts, i.e. Ryan Sutter and Zach Parise. I think they have a pretty solid prospect pool, but not the only guy that I'm like is going to be a fantastic NHL player is Kirill Kaprizov. There's a few other guys, Beckman, Kovanev, that are going to jump into the lineup pretty, not soon, but we need those defining prospects. And the only way to do that is by rebuilding. Minnesota has been a middling team. Ever since they went to the Western Conference Finals in, I believe, 2003 against the Mighty Ducks, got swept. They've only won 2 playoff series, and I think it's because they haven't gone into full rebuild mode. And by full rebuild mode, I mean trading away everything. Scorched earth policy. I mean, all those guys I was talking about, like, oh, you could trade them away for assets. You do it, and you do it soon, and be the worst team. You do it right off of year one, so all these young guys don't remember how terrible you were. And that's why I'm going to keep guys like Kirill Kaprizov in the AHL year one. Have a pretty solid AHL team. Make sure they're stacked. I don't want to expose them to anything too dangerous in the first year, because the first year, I'm going to blow this team apart, except for Ryan Sutter and Zach Parise that I can't. But they'll be the vets on the team. Captains, Mikko Koivu is probably gone. Spurgeon's probably gone. There's a few guys that are 100% gone in my books that we can trade away for assets because you know they have trade value. So that's my plan. Just like Columbus, the Minnesota Wild are going into rebuild mode. That is the plan. A 3-year plan. Year 1, tank. Year 2, continue to tank, develop prospects. Year 3, start to contend for the playoffs. Continue to draft strong. These first 3 years are so important. And I'm going to need your help. If you have any suggestions, leave a comment down below. If you think we're a contender, give me reasons why you think we're a contender, because I want to hear why you think that. But for now, thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this one, please leave a like, leave a comment, share with people who you think may enjoy this sort of thing. I'll see you in the next one. Ciao.